1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, you're listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But SKYLIT is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep SKYLIT alive, please visit our website at skylitbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome back to SKYLIT. This is the SKYLIT Books podcast series, and I'm your host, Maddie Gobbo. I'm the events manager here at SKYLIT Books in Los Angeles. We are open still somehow for in-store shopping every day, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. on weekdays and 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. on weekends. We ask that you wear a mask and social distance and sanitize your hands and all that stuff. We also offer curbside pickup those same hours if you want to get your books safely. We very much recommend using that service. You can order your books over the phone, 323-660-1175, or on our website, skylitbooks.com. Definitely recommend giving us a call. At this point, it's a little bit late in the season, so you will get your books faster if you call us at the store versus ordering them online. That's a little pro tip for you all of you listeners out there. So today I'm delighted to bring on two authors who are going to be in conversation about their new books. Our authors today are Ruth Gilligan and Amber Sparks. Ruth Gilligan is the author of The Butcher's Blessing, which is a new novel out from Tin House, and Amber Sparks is the author of the story collection, And I Do Not Forgive You. I'm going to say just a few words about our lovely guests today, and then Ruth's going to start us off with a reading. They're going to have a lovely conversation, and then Amber is going to close us out with a short story. So you're going to get two readings today for the price of one. All right. So The Butcher's Blessing is set in the Gothic wilds of Ireland. It's a haunting and unforgettable thriller brimming with secrecy, tradition, and superstition. We're going to get into some of all of those secret and esoteric things today. Ruth Gilligan is a graduate of Cambridge and Yale and now works as a senior lecturer in creative writing at the University of Birmingham. She contributes regular literary reviews to The Guardian, Los Angeles Review of Books, Irish Independent, and The Times Literary Supplement. Amber Sparks is the author of The Unfinished World, and her fiction and essays have appeared in American Short Fiction, Paris Review, Tin House, Granta, and elsewhere. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband, daughter, and two cats. Her new short story collection, And I Do Not Forgive You, which has a fantastic cover with a big axe on it, you can't miss it, was named an NPR and Washington Post Best Book of the Year. Ruth and Amber, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
Thanks for having us, Maddie.
Yes, happy to be here.
So I just wanted to situate us in space and time here because we're all on this Zoom call together, but we are very far apart. Ruth, could you tell our listeners where you're joining from?
Yes, I'm joining from my apartment in London. It's pitch black outside and it's very cold and I have the heating on and it feels like the winter has only just begun but may never end. So yeah, that's where I am.
And Amber, where are you today?
I am in Washington, D.C. in my apartment, and it is very gray, although not yet dark. It will be in a couple of hours, and also very cold. So,
well, since you're on a Los Angeles podcast, let's all think sunny thoughts today.
You should have worn our sunglasses just to get us in the mood.
All right, Ruth, well, do you want to start us off with a short reading?
Certainly, absolutely. Thanks so much. So yes, I'm going to read just a little bit from near the start of The Butcher's Blessing, which is a novel that centers around a group of 8 dudes called the Butchers, who travel around the Irish countryside killing cattle according to a set of folkloric customs. But the novel doesn't actually follow the men on their travels. It actually focuses on the women, the wives and the children that they leave behind. So the bit that I'm going to read is from the point of view of Una, who is one of the butcher's daughters, and she's saying goodbye to her father as he sets off on his travels. The dawn was barely cracked when the time came for departure. Her father would walk to a crossroads about a mile down the road, where the others would be waiting with the horses and carts. Sometimes her mother, for a mess, suggested the butchers should drive, should invest in a minivan. They say Ireland's getting more modern by the day. Why not keep up with the times? But Una knew better than to laugh at that joke. Nothing about the old ritual was allowed to change. Her mother hovered next to her now on the front step, the pair of them sheathed in their dressing gown furs. The air outside was well below freezing, making white of their goodbye breaths. "You're a gorgeous girl," her father croaked as he leaned down for a kiss. It took all her strength not to beg him to stay. The butcher embraced his wife one last time, then ambled slowly out the gate. He looked so giant as he moved, big enough to be a myth himself. The fields around were raw with silence, the hillsides stony, pocked and sparse. It was a wonder anything would ever grow again. And Una was so distracted she almost forgot. "Love, your shoe." But as soon as her mother spoke, she took her slipper from her foot and flung it hard, watched it arc through the air and then land in the shimmering frost. It was another custom, meant to wish him luck on his travels. Her father didn't turn, only removed his hand from the pocket of his overalls and raised it high in acknowledgement. Una stayed out on the doorstep watching, her left foot slowly going numb, until she saw the man shape blacken, then shrink, then disappear. Eventually, her white breath faded too, as the moon bowed out and the sun arrived, hurling itself cold and radiant into the morning sky. The following week, it was time to say goodbye to the Christmas holidays too, which meant that Una was back to school and back to the early starts. The world was still black when she set out, though she did notice a set of prints divoted in the dirt. She thought of the fox she sometimes saw in the back garden. Would there be a fresh litter of cubs this year? She considered the question as she buried her hands in her pockets and walked faster, trying to outrun the cold. At school, Una wandered the corridors, yanking down the jumper that kept rising over her midriff. She was growing. She would need a new one soon. Though really, it was a waste of money, since the uniform didn't even serve its purpose. She still stood out a mile, the weirdo, the first-year freak, the butcher's daughter. Sometimes it was just funny looks she got, whispers wafting up through the class like a bad smell. Other times, the girls would scream when she brushed against them, claiming that she had cursed them under her breath. Once, the boys had circled around her, pawing at the tarmac with their shoes, their fingers horns on the side of their heads. Mrs. Donahue had shown up just before they charged. At first, Una had been confused. Hadn't her father always told her how important the butchers were, how integral a role they played in Ireland's history? So if anything, when her parents decided to stop her homeschooling and send her to secondary school, she had thought her new classmates would be dying to be her friend, angling for invites to Sunday tea, to taste her family's meat, and to hear her family's stories. But when the reality had set in, Una asked her mum why everyone seemed to hate her, and her mum could only garble some excuse about her being special. And special, she said, isn't always easy to understand, love. So instead, people just push it away.
Thank you, Ruth. What a beautiful
Thanks.
reading. You can really feel the sense of place coming through so strongly in that section. And I was also thinking about some of the resonances between your work and Amber's work, starting with this introduction of this sort of outcasted female young woman who's seen as dangerous by the society around her. I think there's a lot of connection there with many of Amber's protagonists. So I wanted to start us off just thinking about, first of all, how do the two of you know each other, and how do you come to be on this call together?
Well, I mean, I can answer that, I think, which was just in conversation with people at Tin House when we were like brainstorming, you know, American authors that my work was, you know, quote unquote in conversation with, which is one of those phrases they use. And, you know, Amber's name came up, and I was kind of chuffed when it came up because, you know, I love Amber's fiction, and it was so freaky as well. I teach creative writing at a university, and this semester I've been teaching a module on intertextuality, and we've been looking at fairy tale rewrites. So I had actually just dug up We May Shed These Human Bodies from my shelf so that I could teach from it. And then so in Tin House we're like, we should get Amber Sparks. I was like, yes, we should, yes. So it was kind of one of those freaky moments where like different parts of your life all collide. So, yeah.
So it sounds like maybe your fiction knew each other before you knew each other as people.
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah.
As soon as Tin House, you know, approached me about, I actually had heard of Ruth's book, and I hadn't read it yet, but I was so excited because I looked it up and I was like, oh my God, yes, of course, this is like perfect. So yeah, that was definitely I feel like there. And then of course, having read the book, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, there's a lot to talk about here. So very excited.
Definitely. Well, hopefully we'll get to unpack some more of the things that you thought when you read the book. Ruth, this is your debut, correct?
Actually not correct, but you know, that's okay. Yeah, it's number 2 in America, and then I published some other books in Ireland many years ago when I was much younger. So yeah.
Okay, so my question is then about, you know, how did this book come to find its home at Tin House, and how do you feel about it being out in the world during this very strange time?
Yeah, well, I mean, the strange time thing is definitely it's weird, but also I should say, like, it came out in the UK and Ireland back in March, which in many ways was way weirder just because, like, I was supposed to have a book launch on the 26th of March. And like at the start of March, the world was still figuring out like what the hell was going on. And so we're like, oh yeah, the book launch is still going to go ahead. And then a week later it was like, oh, the book launch might only be able to have 50 people. And then the week later it was like, oh, the book launch is going to have 10 people. And then eventually it was like, there's no book launch. So we like literally went on the like slow decline, and you know, all these things that we had lined up, like bookshop visits and talks and all this kind of stuff, just, you know, one after the other was cancelled and then gone. So actually fast forward like nearly 9 months now, and it's coming out in America. Like, yes, it's weird to publish a book in a pandemic, but also this time we knew like we knew what we were dealing with. So like all the plans we made were already virtual, and frankly, like there are some advantages for, you know, especially because I'm based in the UK, so like I was, you know, doing stuff virtually works better for me because I don't have to, you know, somehow get a plane fare and fly over just so I can say hello to people face to face. So there are like some, I'm all about the silver linings at the moment because there aren't very many this year. So that is one of the few silver linings. So yeah, it's been weird, but March was way weirder because it was right at that like tipping point. And it was almost like, it was funny, like some authors who were even due to be published even a couple of weeks or a month after me ended up getting pushed back, like either a few months, or like I know I've got friends who've been pushed back like a whole year, because it was still early enough that they could do that. But the thing is, the Butchers, it's called The Butchers in the UK, but The Butcher's Blessing in the US, which we might talk about, I don't know. But The Butchers, like it was already printed, it was in the bookshops, it was like ready to go. So like it was happening whether we, you know, wanted it to at that point or not. So yeah, that was March was stressful. So this is like, yeah, well, we're kind of like used to this weirdness now. So
yeah, it's been really interesting because so actually, yeah, my book came out at the end of February, and so, you know, I was lucky enough to actually have like I had like, it was really weird because I had like a week of launch in New York and in DC, and like, so my husband and my daughter were actually with me, and we, you know, went to New York and Philly and Boston and did readings there. And like, as we were traveling, the pandemic was like getting to be like closer, and then it was kind of like looking dicey. And then, you know, as soon as, like, literally as soon as we got home, it was like, it's here. No, you know, everything shut down. So, so I was lucky to have that, but at the same time, yeah, I totally know, because all the rest of my book tour got canceled at that point immediately. And at first it was, yeah, it was like hard and weird and sucky, although much worse for people who had books that came out in, like, you know, I felt like April or May, you know, but also at the same time, there were some like interesting silver linings, because I feel like I've done, including this event, right, where I feel like I've done so many more events than I probably would have done otherwise, including in all these places where I, like, you know, like LA, where I can't afford to actually, like, usually add to my travels for books. So in a way, yeah, it's, and to be able to connect with an author like you in London is actually really cool. So, you know, like you said, the few silver linings, but
yeah, we cling to them.
Yes.
Yeah, this year has really been a crash course in adaptability, and I know you two have been really game for some strange new formats. So thank you for joining us here on this podcast, which we didn't really have before. So I'm really interested to hear the two of you talk about each other's work. So I'm going to kind of take a step back and let you guys get into it. But if you need me, I'll be listening, and I'll come back at the end for a little outro. But take it away, please.
Well, I guess I can start, right, because I have a sort of a question. You know, speaking of the pandemic, sorry, but I was curious, you know, given sort of the subject matter of your book and sort of the mad cow disease that runs through the book, you know, did that feel like weird or weirdly relevant to be, you know, publishing and talking about that right now specifically? Or
yeah, it's really funny. It's like, so in being completely honest, like when I was writing the book and when I was working on the book, like I should say for listeners that the book is set along the border counties in Ireland, so along the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, and there's a lot of stuff about that being kind of a weird liminal in-between space, and there's some like literally like smuggling over the border of both cattle and meat, because yeah, there's a lot of cows in this book, but basically when I was working on the book and when I would tell people that I was working about, they were like, oh, that's very topical, because like you have to remember, like I'm an Irish person who lives in the UK, and when I was working on this book, all that anyone could talk about was Brexit. So it was just like Brexit, and the Northern Irish border was like the center of all the discussions and all the negotiations, and you know, literally stuff like trying to get goods and people and animals over the border. What are we going to do about that? That was like all people could talk about. So when I was like, oh yeah, I'm writing a novel that's set, you know, in that near the border, blah, blah, they're like, oh, that's so topical. So in a way, I had kind of prepped myself for when the book did eventually come out, that like that would be the way that the book was deemed kind of zeitgeisty or of the moment or whatever. And then, as you said, it came out, and yeah, it's a book in which, you know, it's set in 1996, which was when the mad cow disease stuff was going on. And obviously then it comes out in the middle of a pandemic. So suddenly it was like this huge pivot to like, oh, your book is still topical, but for like a completely different reason, which was more just like, I don't know, freaky than anything else. I guess, you know, at this point, people then were like, well, what wisdom do you have from writing this book and researching that time to offer us in this moment of pandemic? And I'm like, I've got nothing. I have absolutely no, I am completely baffled by 2020 in the same way that everyone else is. So, I mean, there are definitely like some interesting parallels. Like the book definitely looks at the way that, you know, with Mad Cow, you know, the way it was depicted in the media and the way that like it gets politicized, and also the real tension between how it gets depicted in the British media as opposed to the Irish media, and the tensions there. And like that is definitely something that I've noticed, during COVID is all of those things. So yeah, there's definitely like points of connection, but like in truth, as I said, definitely no like learning points except like pandemics are bad, which I think we've all kind of figured out. Yeah.
For sure. I was interested in, I know Maddie mentioned your young protagonist, Una, and sort of, I write a lot as well about sort of young girls on the cusp of adulthood, and like specifically, I think one thing that I found really fascinating reading this book was her, sort of love and embrace of this very sort of wild ancient tradition, and sort of the animal aspects of it. It's kind of, she's on the one hand this, modern girl living in this modern society and, playing video games and things, but then also like has this very, this attraction to this like very animal quality, literally, I guess. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about that, because that's something that I've written a lot about in books too. And I think, and speaking of fairy tales, I think that is in so many fairy tales, right? The young girl who, chooses to turn into an animal or become, transforms into an animal, or is transformed into an animal by, a god or something like that. So in mythology. So
yeah, I think it is, and I think it's so important that as you say, Una is on the cusp, and as you said, like so many myths and fairy tales they're all about metamorphoses and changing and that, and she kind of she gets her period for the first time during the book, so it is like literally that moment of transition from kind of youth to adulthood. And yeah, I guess because she she lives in the countryside and she's surrounded by animals, like that kind of primal connection is there, and yet like that very much is a world, it's super gendered, like it's a man's world, and that the kind of farming and the cattle industry and that whole aspect of Irish life is like so male dominated, and the women are supposed to be like inside doing the laundry, doing the cooking, whatever. So I think she kind of, on the one hand, is like becoming aware of her womanhood. She's like starting to get boobs, and she's starting to kind of realize that she looks different to the boys in her class, but at the same side she's kind of baffled by the idea that like therefore her life has to take one path as opposed to the other, and she's kind of like, wait, what? And I kind of love that, and how she finds ways to work around that, and just be like, no, I don't think I'm okay with that, or just can't quite comprehend that her whole path would be dictated just because like her chest is starting to like flesh out, because she wants, she adores her father, she wants to follow his path, she wants to be a butcher as well. So then when people turn around and say, no, that is not a route for you, she doesn't like it. So she's gonna do something about it. But yeah, and I mean, I'm so interested because I think what you were saying about in your books and the animal and the transformations and stuff, when I was writing The Butcher's Blessing, I wrangled for a long time about like what it was, and obviously there is myth and folklore and ancient Irish traditions braided in there, but like, and for a while I was like, wait, am I writing magical realism? Am I writing like something mythical? But like actually the book is basically a realist novel. Like it is nothing magic, nothing weird actually happens. And in many ways, as I said, it's set in 1996, and I like did a lot of research and plotted out all the main events and even the main news stories and even the main like pop culture references that happened that year, and use that as the template for the events of the book. So like it's really grounded in fact in that year. Whereas you have the freedom, I suppose, to like, if you want to make someone turn into an animal, like you just do it. And is that like, has that always been, are you just like, I want to write into that space where I have the freedom to make those things happen? Is that like a conscious thing, or does it just not cross your mind to not let those things happen?
Yeah, I guess it depends. You know, because I do both, right? Like I have stories that are more realistic, and then obviously that are ones that deep more into the speculative. And you know, I think well, it's a couple things. I think, it's when you're playing with short stories, it's always, I think there's always a little more freedom there in terms of what you can do and how far you can go, because it's a short story. You don't have to carry it through an entire novel. And so it's actually something I'm kind of dealing with right now, because I am writing a novel, and actually one of the central questions that I'm having to ask myself is magical stuff actually happening in this novel or not? It's interesting. I'm actually wrestling with that. Like,
I love that you don't know.
Yeah. I don't know yet. And it's weird because I'm like halfway through the novel and I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna be real or not. I generally tend to find, though, that with longer form stuff, I don't have as much that's sort of happening that's overtly magical, I guess. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. Like I have in The Unfinished World, there's a novella at the end of it. And that's probably the longest thing I've ever written. It actually started out as a novel. And, when it was, and at one time there was like all this, like, there were like blood eagle sacrifices and like, dragons and like all kinds of like very overt, like gods and things in it. And then as I edited it and turned it into a novella, it kind of all the sort of magical stuff faded into the background, and it's there. I mean, a lot like your novel, right, where there's like the suggestion of something wild, something to these myths and legends, but it's, there's nothing like specifically that you can point to and say that is magic. So yeah, it's an interesting choice, and I'm not, I like both, and I like reading both actually a lot too. So it just kind of depends, I guess, on the work and what I feel like it requires.
Yeah, that's really yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah. And where it's set to, and when and how specific, is a big part of it too, obviously. Yeah, it's actually interesting because, when I don't know that I've ever written anything that didn't at least have some suggestion of something else happening, some otherworldliness. And it's funny because I think about, how sort of against a lot of American writing that actually is. and I was thinking about this the other day because I was actually talking to somebody, and I have an aunt that is Scottish. And she, one of the first gifts that I ever got, like books that I ever got as a gift, I was like 4 years old, and my aunt gave me this collection of Angela Carter fairy tales. But it was like for children. She like wrote them for children, which I discovered this like just recently when I pulled it out and looked at it, and I was like, oh my God, that's Angela Carter. And it's illustrated really beautifully and bizarrely. And I think, there's like that side of my family always actually was sort of feeding me this, like, this steady diet of just sort of magic. And it's really interesting because then that sort of, I have this other side of my family that's very like Swedish and very like, farmerly and like, Protestant and non-imaginative, and sort of seeing those two things come together in a weird way, I think forms sort of the ethos of the magic, not magic in the stories, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I'm like, wow, what a cool aunt. Like, imagine, like, all the things to give a 4-year-old, like that is a great present. Well done. I mean, and obviously, like, and again, I was saying that like I've been teaching this stuff this semester, and obviously when we came on to Fairy Tale Week, we started with Angela Carter, and everyone just like minds were blown, and everyone just couldn't get over it. And I mean, is she like, for you, is she kind of like the the canonical angry feminist fairy tale reteller, or like do we think like things have moved on since her? I mean, I just like, you know, she's remains such a touch point, but like, A, it's been a while now, and B, there have been loads of other examples of kind of contemporary women reworking fairy tales to have kind of feminist agendas or whatever. So I suppose, yeah, I'm also just looking for tips, but you know, I'm keen to know, like, if you think, you know, if she still is the touchstone, or whether there are other writers you think that are adding or building on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, yeah, I mean, definitely Angela Carter is still a huge influence, and has, you know, been ever since I was in college and first discovered her, you know, well, first, you know, other than when I was 4, and was like, oh my gosh, yes, she's like turned the tables, and this is, you know, revolutionary stuff. And I love that. But yeah, I mean, there's, you know, there's definitely a lot of other people doing really interesting things too with fairy tales. You know, I think about like Carmen Maria Machado, and you know, some of the other women that are writing these really, Kelly Link, sort of appending fairy tales in really interesting ways. And it's not to say that Angela Carter isn't still a touch point, or even the touch point, but in so many ways, those, I think there's even more complex stuff going on now in a lot of the interpretations that I see, you know, where people are really, it's not quite so overt. It's much more, I don't want to say subtle, because that makes Angela Carter sound like she's not great, which she is. But but there's just a lot going on, and people are wrestling with a lot of interesting things, which is really cool to me. I think there's like a whole, it's almost like there's a whole generation of people that for the first time, I think, really feel free to play with fairy tale and mythology and like science fiction and fantasy and all these other elements in a way that I think people kind of thought for a long time was like not serious literature, you know? I don't know if you see that like at all with your students, or with, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess what I am always struck, like, it's always the female students that really connect with it, right? Like there is still, like, I think there is and it's funny, like reading like fairy tale, like theory, I know this can sound really boring or whatever, but that like traditionally that when fairy tales were thought of as stories for like women and children or whatever, and now it seems to be like, I'm trying to rack my brains to think of like male examples. I'm sure there are plenty, but like off the top of my head, and I mean there's obvious reasons for that, and kind of as I said, in terms of kind of feminist agendas, or even pushing beyond kind of gender boundaries or whatever, like fairy tales lend themselves so much to that. But it is amazing that even within the classroom, that like that is the week that always sparks with the female students, and they're like, okay, now I'm interested in this module. So yeah, it definitely is. It is super interesting. And I wanted to ask you as well, because one thing that basically one thing I get asked all the bloody time with this book is whether the butchers are real. People are obsessed with knowing whether the myth of the butchers is real. Yeah. And like, it's so interesting with your stories. I feel like some of them I'm able to go, oh, that's a retelling of Peter Pan, or that's like riffing on, you know, the Sabine women or whatever. But like, then some of them are like fairy tale that either I've never heard of, or I think you've probably made up, and like they're, you know, they're fairy tale-ish, and that's fine. That's like, I don't care, but it's so interesting to me how much people and like readers who, when they ask me the question like, are the butchers real, and I kind of reply by saying like, well, define real. Like, are folktales real? And they're like, don't be obtuse. But they really feel like super strongly about like whether or not this is a pre-existing folktale or whether I've made it up. And yeah, I just really wanted to kind of pick your brains about that, and whether you've found something similar, and whether you think it matters, or
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, it's funny, right? Because I think about that a lot, because, you know, fairy tales are so old, right? And they're there's that study that came out like not that long ago that showed that they're even much more old than we thought that they were, and that all these men in the 1700s, you know, actually like stole them from, you know, women who'd been telling these same stories since like you know, the dawn of humanity, basically. And so like they're just in so many ways they're just like foundational stories or foundational myths. So it's like, in a way, it's like very hard not to, you know, be riffing on some fairy tale or fable or folk tale, because so much of you know, all of our story conventions, you know, come out of those. I mean, it's funny, like when I went to my daughter's 5, and I went and was like a guest in her, you know, kindergarten class, and talked to them about what, you know, being a writer. And I talked to them about, I taught them about like how to write a fairy tale, or how to, and, you know, we talked about like you know, you meet 3 people and you do 3 tasks, and, you know, then, and all sort of the conventional rules of fairy tales. And it was funny because they just instinctively get that. It's like, it's so built into you, even by the time that you're 5 years old, that this is like the way that a story works, that you're going to do a certain number of tasks and meet these people. And there's it's you know, it sort of rivals the like traditional, you know, literary, you know, device plot line. And so, you know, I think that I always think it's like, this is right, this sounds like me totally hedging, but I always feel like when people ask me that same question, right, I'm like, who cares? Like, of course, you know, all of our stories come from like some basic myth or whatever, but I do think it's interesting, because I will tend to pick some of the stories that I do want to retell. Like Donkey Skin, for example, in the new book, A Place for Hidden Things, or Hiding Precious Things, is actually based on the Donkey Skin myth and or fairy tale, and it's not one that a lot of people are familiar with. So people will be like, what's wrong with you? Like, why did you come up with this story about a father who wants to sleep with his own daughter? That's creepy as hell. Like, and it's like, actually, that's like based on a, you know, that is totally 100% a real fairy tale. I'm just retelling it.
Don't shoot the messenger.
And there's like a French movie that's like from ostensibly for kids from the 50s that about Donkey Skin, which with Catherine Deneuve in it, which is amazing. It's actually well worth seeing. It's totally crazy. It's amazing. But yeah, so I always feel like it to me, I agree with you. I'm like, who cares? Like, it doesn't, like, half of everything that we write is plucked from somewhere or from some tradition anyway, and then the other half comes out of our weird brain. And so, you know, it doesn't matter to me. But yeah, people do get really weird about it. You know, and they get weird about, you know, whether or not things are just true, right? Also, like whether or not things really happened. So, which is especially weird when you write like speculative or like, you know, obviously not true fiction, because it's like,
I was about to say, surely you don't get asked that, do you?
Oh, I do. Oh yeah. I mean, not necessarily, like, people won't be like, oh, did, you know, she really turn into a witch or whatever, but they'll be like, oh, you know, was that historical event in that story really true, or did the, you know, was that based, or is this story based on your own life? I've gotten that a lot, and it's like, it's a lady in space. Like, what do you like? No. Obviously not.
It's such an interesting impulse or like instinct to like want to know that, and like what I'm so interested as to what that proves or reveals. Like, if you said yes, would they be like, oh great, or would they be like, oh that's disappointing, I thought your imagination, you know what I mean? Like, I can't decide which people would prefer. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know either. It's pretty funny.
But I've had some pretty hostile responses to when I do confess that the butchers, i.e. this group of 8 men that wander Ireland killing cows in this special way, are indeed something that I made up. And like, they fit, you know, the book is braided through with loads of Irish folklore and superstition. And like, when I was doing my research, I found there are loads and loads of weird rituals and superstitions around cows. So I kind of smushed them all together to make the butchers. So they're like, they're less an invention than like an amalgamation. But you know, they are, yeah, I did make them up. But people get really angry. and they feel like I've like tricked them somehow, or that there's something like disingenuous about it, and that yeah, and like, but even it's so funny, like even my editor didn't realize that it was like really late in the editorial process. My British editor turned around to me and we were like trying to figure out this one particular plot hole, and he was like, oh Ruth, like we just can't get this thing with Una to work, what are we going to do, blah blah blah. And I was like, oh, we could just change that one aspect of the butchers of the ritual. And he was like, well Ruth, you can't do that. And I suddenly realized, I was like, James, you do know that I've made it up. And he like looked at me and like, yeah, he was just flabbergasted. I mean, I should say, like, he's British and he obviously just assumed it was like an Irish thing that he'd never heard of. Which again, I don't see, like loads of people are like not assuming that they would have heard of the butchers, but they still want to know that like it's real. Although again, how are folktales real? But whatever. But yeah, people, so yeah, loads of people don't know, and they get really quite angry at this idea that I've made something up, even though like our job as novelists is to make stuff up. So I find it like, I just think it's a really interesting, and especially when you're occupying in that space of fairy tale and fable and folklore and whatever, that still counts for something.
Yeah, it's interesting. So are Irish people in particular offended? Like, are they like offended that you've like made up this, like, you know, part of their history or whatever? Or
I don't know. I don't think so. I think also even like I had this conversation a while ago, and loads of my Irish friends were there and they were also like, sorry, what? It's not real? Like everyone just like, and I don't know, maybe Amber, it's just a credit to our storytelling that everyone just thinks that everything that comes out of our mouth is indeed a fact. But yeah, so no, I think in general it's this idea, and that somehow, I guess because there is, you know, as you mentioned, like such a spate of retellings, you know, there's something in the air at the moment, right? Over the last kind of 5 years or something, there have been so many great, whether it's fairy tale rewritings or classical myth retellings or whatever, like that seems to be very much in the air. But I think the default mode is that, you know, it is a retelling rather than an invention. So I think people just, that's their assumption. So then when that gets skewed, they're a bit like thrown.
It's interesting too, because it makes me think about, you know, I was thinking about a while ago, I got really interested in American myths or American folk tales, you know, like Paul Bunyan and you know, Johnny Appleseed and all these stories, which actually, of course, Johnny Appleseed is like the one that's true, which I did not know until I found that out very recently, actually. He was a real person. But most of the, my friend Matt Bell actually has a book coming out that sort of loosely plays with that myth, and I found out it's real, and I was like, oh my God. But the most of the folk tales are not only, I mean, obviously not real, but you know, Pecos Bill or whatever, but they're actually, a lot of them were are not that old. And they were made up by American advertising companies or American advertisers for different products. Like I guess Paul Bunyan was like an advertising thing for the logging industry, and there's another one. John, what's his name? Joe Magarac, who's like the guy made of steel, was apparently an invention of like the steel industry. So or some things that I can't remember, I'm probably getting my facts wrong here, but they were definitely like made up like to be, you know, folk tales, to have this like folksy sense of authenticity and have people think that they were these very old stories, but in fact they're not. So it's sort of an interesting thought too.
That is so interesting, and also just like super depressing that like folk tales equals capitalism. Yay!
Totally. Oh, did I freeze or did you freeze? I think I might have froze for a second.
Someone froze, but we're back.
Oh, okay. I think I'm back. Cool.
Yes, that's amazing. Tell me more about, you're writing a novel now. Is that scary?
It's terrifying. I hate it.
Having written the small things. Oh no, don't say that. Well, I guess I'm trying to think of a better way to put. Well, why are you doing it? Are you like, bearing in mind, you know, your fiction is so your short fiction is so great. Did you just decide you're going to take the plunge and give it a go, or like, yeah, I want to hear about
it's
Switch.
like just total stubbornness, I think. You know, at some point, you know, I mean, there's also this like annoying, you know, of course, idea that, you know, is still very prevalent in the publishing industry, that like, you know, you have to write a novel, right? Like you can write your short story collections and that's all very fine and good, but eventually you must write your novel. But, you know, I also, you know, don't necessarily believe that. And so,
It's funny
yeah.
also, sorry to jump in, but that's also like, that's always the kind of what you get told in like the UK and Ireland, but America's always held up as like the place where the short story is an accepted form of, and you know, that's not, you don't have to do the like sign the 2-book deal, which like we'll publish your stories if you give us a novel. Like we're all, you know, the myth is that in America that's not true, but is it true?
Yeah, it's true.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm glad.
I don't think it's different here at all. I mean, I think, you know, there are, I feel like I noticed that novellas are less, like there's almost no novellas in the United States. That's like, it's just like such a rare form. And I've noticed like when I've traveled like in Europe and stuff that there are just a lot more novellas published, and people seem to read those a lot more. So, you know, but I think, but yeah, generally speaking, I mean, it's changing, right? I do see that short stories, the short story form is kind of becoming a little bit more accepted, and more people are reading it and more people are publishing it. And, you know, it's seen as a little more commercially viable, but I don't think a lot. But I'm actually not, I mean, actually that irritates me. So I've kind of pushed back against that. But, you know, at some point it almost got to this point where I was like, you know, I just want to see if I can do it. Now I'm just annoyed, and I want to just like see if I can. And I've written a couple novels that, you know, didn't work out. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try this again. And I totally hate it. But now I'm just so stubborn that I'm like, I will finish this. I don't even care. It's terrible.
And do you allow yourself to like write little bits of short fiction just on the side to like keep you, yeah,
I mean, that's actually how I've written the last 2 short story collections. Is
it's been wild. Oh my god.
Yes, I know, it sounds so ridiculous, but yeah, because I'm like, oh god, I'm so bored, I have to do something else now. But you know, and that's, I'm sure, will happen again here, but I am doing something a little different this time, where I'm letting myself sort of you know, write it without any structure, without any sort of like purpose or intent. And then, you know, at the end, I'll sort of gather up everything I have and then try to make it into a novel from that point on. But I'm not trying so hard to like plot it out and, you know, sort of be rigid about it. So we'll see how that goes. I don't know. How do you write a novel? You tell me.
It's so interesting. So I did an event just earlier today with Avni Joshi, who was shortlisted for the Booker Prize this year for Burnt Sugar, and she was talking about how I think she wrote like 8 drafts of that book or something, which is just a huge commitment. But I was kind of like asking her like what finally clicked, and she was like exactly what you said. She said she was a really dogged planner to begin with, and then actually she just gave herself permission to like kind of go with the flow and follow the character's voice, and that was the thing that kind of unlocked and finally landed her in the final draft that then got published and was shortlisted for the Booker Prize and is amazing. So but yeah, listening to her and then you in one day, I'm just like, oh god, I'm doing it wrong. I am like an avid plotter. Like that is just how I work, also because I seem to say, well, yeah, I mean, I also, you know, this book and the previous book as well, like had multiple narrators, like multiple POVs, like, you know, The Butcher's Blessing has 4.5 kind of. So like there's a lot of different voices, there's a lot of different storylines. And as I said, because I was committed to like sticking to the, you know, it's mapped out over the course of 1996. So it's like month per month, I had to like hit certain things, and whether that was like a big news story or the Spice Girls releasing their debut single, you know, I wanted to hit those notes. So yeah, I'm a planner, but that's just in my nature. Like I am that neurotic, organized person, and that translates to, but I always wonder, I always fantasize about a day when I will just like be one of those go with the flow people, but it just goes against like every instinct in my body. So yeah.
What are you working on now?
I am working on the next one, which actually I have set myself a challenge. I don't know, well, I suppose I don't know if you do this, you literally just tell me that you have set yourself a challenge of writing a novel, so that is a pretty big challenge.
Yeah.
Why do we do this? Why do we make life hard for ourselves? As I said, my default has always been to write novels with multiple characters, because I love reading books like that have, that move around and have different voices, and often have, you get two perspectives on the same situation, and I love that. And also I find that easier, because I think if you stick with a character for the interesting stuff, as soon as things get dull, you can be like, okay, see you later, I'm going to pop over into this character's mind instead. So for me, it's like cheating, because you just always write the juicy good bits with each character. So anyway, I've set myself a challenge of writing a whole novel with only one protagonist. This is like the task I have set myself, and it is so hard. So I'm cheating, I'm fully cheating. So rather than, because the idea of just like starting with the character and then like moving chronologically forward for 80,000 words, I'm just like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how the reader isn't just going to get so bored of just like plodding along with me. So yeah, I've cheated, and it now jumps around in time quite dramatically. So it starts when the protagonist is 30, and then it goes back to when she's 5, and then it jumps to when she's 20, and then it jumps to when she's 15, and so it jumps around in time. So it kind of feels like different characters or different voices and different locations, but it is still the same. So yeah, it's so funny. I've like set my own challenge, and then I'm cheating myself. It's like, I can see what you're doing, because I'm me.
I don't know why we do it. We're so bizarre writers. Self-torture.
Yeah, it's really, but it's really different. It's all about it's basically about motherhood and art. So there are no cows, there's no folklore, there's no myth. It's it's a very different beast, but I think again, another challenge, so we'll see how that goes.
It's exciting.
All right, so I'm jumping back in, and I would love, Amber, if you could play us off with a reading from your collection.
Sure. I will read You Won't Believe What Really Happened to the Sabine Women. It was mentioned earlier, and we've been talking about, animals and women and girls and things, so seems like a good one. After the attack, we pulled ourselves shut like hospital curtains. Snap. They out there, we in here, pain distilled through tiny wires and tubes. Pain concealed and compressed until someone has great need of it, until it becomes a gift. History will tell you we made quick peace with our rapists, bore them children, married them. History will tell you how we launched ourselves into the battle like burning arrows, how we landed between kin and assaulters. History will tell you that we united Rome. History likes to lie about women. What really happened was this. When we saw our men at war, we almost went out like candles. It's easy to shrink yourself down when anger burns through you, hot, fierce, like a grass fire. It sucks the oxygen out. It eats up all but the most essential parts. Heart, lungs, brain, blood, everything else diminishes, shadows itself, clears out disease. To slake after anger is such a relief. To run toward oblivion, a slaking of dark thirst. And Demeter saw us scrambling in her fields like mice and took pity on us, for had she not been assaulted by Poseidon, forced despite all her powers to bear his twins, she knew what it is to carry the weight of so much rage. And she pulled us into her arms, up with the soil and the grass, and she scattered us through the skies as stars, shimmering and immortal in the night skies. And for thousands of years, when men looked at those skies, our husbands, our sons, our grandsons, and so on for many generations, they saw us And they were filled with remorse, and they remembered what it meant to be a woman at the mercy of men. They built us a temple with statues of ivory and gold, and every 7 years the daughters of Rome wove new dresses for us from the finest cloth on earth. Now we are forgotten. We faded in the sky, and no men remember us. They tell our stories the way they never happened, and though the women can sense that something is wrong, the feeling is too vague for resolution. The halo of lights from the city and the haze from the cars keep us almost hidden from human view. We are growing jaded, sadder. We can only speak in whispers now. But we still remember our power, what our whispers can warn of if we aim them at the right ears. Our choice is coming to a head. Finally unleash our vengeance or forget that we were ever here. We cannot destroy man alone. We lost the ability to do that ages ago. We are so much stardust, and only a little earth still anchors us at all. But it is that little bit that keeps us interested, keeps us watching over the women of this world, waiting, hoping for the ones who will say our names. They have only to summon us. They have only to say that they've needed us so. We would swoop down like hawks then, our pain finally put to use, propelling us to the foot of the earth. We would eat evil men like mice. We would rebuild the world in our image, in our glory, in our dazzling beauty and brilliance, and then, only then, would we do the thing they say we did long ago, rid them of their wars and bring them peace beyond dreaming, beyond the imagining of any living thing.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. I want to eat men like mice. I feel so inspired.
Actually, time for my dinner, so guess what I'm gonna have.
Oh, it's been such a blast having you both. Thank you so much for sharing your work and having such a fun and factual conversation. I'm going to be mulling over, Amber, your comment about folklore being corporate funded in the US. That's going to be haunting me for weeks, I'm sure.
Mind blown.
All right. So before we go, I just wanted to see if there are any last things you wanted to say or mention to our listeners.
I cannot think of anything.
Just get the books. Just get the Butcher's Blessing and get And I Do Not Forgive You. And get it from SKYLIT Books. And you're not going to regret it. They're both going to be great. They're going to be great companions for you out there in the cold December world.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is it for today. Ruth and Amber, thank you again. It was a joy and a delight to have you on. And listeners, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you. We love you. We cherish you. And we hope that we can do more of these things in person, have more of these conversations in person in 2021. Fingers crossed for that vaccine to come through. All right. Well, Ruth and Amber, take care today. And congratulations again on the books.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right, everybody. Catch you on the flip side.
Thank you for listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylitbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.
I see